Welcome to Revenue Reinvention, the podcast where we get real about transforming business for predictable success. In each episode, we'll embark on a journey of business evolution. We'll discuss how to reshape the way companies approach revenue generation and operational efficiency. On today's episode, we sat down with Sid Kumar, Senior Vice President of Revenue Operations at Hubspot. We dove deep into the end-to-end customer journey and how RevOps can bring clarity to deliver a unified experience. Let's jump right in. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Reinvention. I'm your host, Phil Dillard, here today with Sid Kumar, SVP of Revenue Operations for Hubspot. How you doing today, Sid?
Doing great, Phil. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm very excited to speak with you because there's some really interesting stuff going on in your background. It looks like you've had a really fun career. Started in banking and on the finance and development side, and then moved into like the operations and the sales side, and now have a really interesting track record at a couple of amazing companies and what sounds like an amazing role at HubSpot, and a great way to kick us off in the conversation about revenue ops, that combination of sales and operations that enables the beautiful flywheel. So I'm really excited to start with us. So can you tell us a little bit about your role at HubSpot? Like, how do you describe what you do for a living when people ask you what you do?
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, it has been a fun ride over the career, and all these different experiences really build off of each other. But if I think about RevOps at HubSpot, we really think about it as the go-to-market COO operate, helping partner with our go-to-market teams, sales, marketing, customer success, but in an integrated way that gives you just a integrated view across that customer journey and helps orchestrate, align the different teams. So you're solving for customers and really thinking about what are all the elements that make up revenue and how do you orchestrate teams, data, systems, process, people to deliver the best CX you can. So I view it really as the business partner to our go-to-market organization that helps see around corners, that helps drive a very proactive motion, and helps drive those outcomes both for our customers, our partners, and HubSpot.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I full disclosure, I've been a HubSpot user as a startup, and I can only imagine the broad range of customers that you work with. When you think about like the integrated experience that you're talking about, do you have like a good story that you like to use, or an anecdote, or a good customer example to make that really like visceral to people? What's the difference between traditional customer experience or traditional customer service or sales that's different when you think about combining that all together in a RevOps lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's natural to want to operate as functions, your marketing, your sales, and your customer success. And there's handoffs between these different teams. And I think it's taking a very different approach to that. It's saying, let's, as a go-to-market organization, as a company, let's really understand how our buyers want to buy and engage with HubSpot, whether it's a prospect, whether it's an existing customer, and really obsess about what does that journey look like. For us, we labeled it customer-centric operating model, CCOM.
Hmm.
And that is our way of really looking at what are all those different touch points across our different phases of go-to-market, which we call attract, engage, delight. And we purposely call our go-to-market organization the flywheel because it's a closed loop, not a linear model. It's like, you attract customers, you engage them as part of the buyer's journey, and you delight them, make sure they're getting the outcomes that they signed up to get. And creating that flywheel and really thinking about customer outcomes at every one of those phases. What is the prospect or customer trying to do as they're going along that buyer journey? And then you start to realize that, yes, there's certain functions that play a little bit more in certain parts of that buyer's journey, but it really becomes a team sport is
Hmm.
what you realize. So I think it's a reorientation around what go-to-market looks like, as opposed to, here's marketing's role, sales role, and customer success's role. So it's a bit of a paradigm shift thinking horizontally as opposed to thinking functionally or vertically.
Now, conceptually, as a customer, I think that's easy to digest. You say, wherever I come in to meet HubSpot,
Yep.
I expect everybody on the team to know who I am and to be able to serve me. I expect the last person I spoke to have informed the next person, like a frictionless experience. I think it's easy from the consumer side because we have some expectations from that. But it seems like it might be tougher from the company side, especially if you had to make a transition from an old paradigm to a newer one where you're integrating this all together. And it seems like RevOps role is kind of pulling that together. Can you describe like what the situation was, or is at HubSpot and where you're elevating it to
Yeah.
operationally?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It is a bit of a paradigm shift. It's how do we shift from the functional way of thinking about things to the integrated view, working backwards from your customers. I think that's really the crux of the question. I think the first is really having RevOps can play a really strong role in terms of defining what that process looks like, defining what the buyer's journey looks like,
Hmm.
what are the North Star outcomes at each of those different phases, how are you going to measure leading and lagging indicators to those different outcomes. And so I think it's defining that process and getting that buy-in across your different teams. And then it's thinking about what is the operating system that drives the accountability, that drives the insights, that supports real-time visibility into performance, that allows you to see, are you on track at each of those different micro steps to where you want to be to deliver that outcome you expected at that stage, or not? And then how do you course correct, and how do you really get almost like real time action on those different areas? So I think RevOps plays a really big role in terms of defining that process, driving the accountability, and then bringing together the data, the systems, the role clarity across these different stages to help that really that GTM operating system come together.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm reflecting on your background in sales, and I'm wondering. I love asking these questions of salespeople who get deeper into operations, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times in experiences I've had in companies, people on the operations side are like, "Oh my God, sales has promised all this stuff, and we have to find a way to deliver," and it kind of messes up the engine or causes friction into it. And I think what I'm hearing in this integrated component is that you're trying to break that problem. Can you
Yeah.
share a little bit about how your sales background informed how you drive RevOps in this integrated way?
Yeah, I'll say I've sat in the seat of a leader in marketing, in sales, and in customer success. So it's been really interesting to kind of look at this on the other side and how do you bring it all together, because I've sat on the other side as a frontline leader for those different teams in my time at CA. And if I think about sales, I'll bring it together with marketing. That typically is where you need a very tight alignment, and it's around demand creation. It's always a question of, all right, do you get enough leads? Do you have enough pipeline? Whose responsibility is it? And I think the answer is it's both teams' responsibility for it. And one example in this is, and I've done this a number of times at the different companies I've been at, it's taking a step back and saying, what does our joint objective need to look like? And for us to service our customers in the way we want to, and bring our solutions and connect it with our customers. And it starts to give you a sense of what does the pie need to look like? And when you get into that, then you start to say, well, what are all the different sources that contribute to that pie? Who is accountable to those different sources, and who drives the outcome and execution related to those different sources? So your discussion then becomes not how you're carving up the pie per se. When you're off or ahead, you can say, maybe I want to double down on a particular source of pipeline. But the other side is you're jointly working to how do you grow the pie? And I
Hmm.
think that's where, again, the shift is we're thinking about demand. We're not thinking about leads and opportunities and pipeline in different conversations. We're talking about demand, which manifests itself in pipeline. There's a number of different inputs to it that are contributed by different teams. And it's aligning everybody around a consistent demand framework in this example. So you have clarity into not just what the solve is, but how you're going to get there, and then what are the metrics you're going to use to measure success, and who are you going to lean on within the organization to go drive that.
I think that's a really interesting point when you talk about a consolidated or centralized demand framework, right?
Yeah.
If I'm hearing you right, the ability to deliver a customer-centric model means that people need to see and understand the customer from different perspectives. If I'm a marketer or a salesperson or a success person, I might have a different perspective of a customer based on how I can serve them, but I need to understand them comprehensively. Can you talk a little bit more how those things combine to flesh out the customer centric model that you're trying to deliver?
Yeah, yeah. Like if you take, you take a specific example of a part of the journey when, customer has signed on as a customer, what are you doing between then and making sure they get value for that specific use case? Are they getting what they spent all this time in a sales cycle? And are they getting value? So I think it's there in that context, it's obsessing over, are we activating, are we onboarding, and are we helping the customer drive usage of the key capabilities within the solution that are directly tied to the outcomes that they are going to get the value from, that were part of the business case to get to the HubSpot purchase in the first place. I think you could, in a linear world where you think of it as, okay, that would traditionally be the world of customer success. And you say, all right, sales is sort of out of that discussion and it's now customer success's world. Instead, if you say, I want to obsess about customer value via adoption, activation, and usage, it suddenly starts to say, oh, wait, well, what role can sales play in that? What role can marketing play in that? What role can product play in that? So you start to, that's the customer centricity part of it, is what is the customer outcome you're trying to drive at that particular phase? And then what are the different teams that work together to make that outcome as compelling and, an excellent customer experience as possible? There's just one example there.
Sure.
Um,
So how do you address some of the inherent challenges in that from the sake of, if I'm sales, I might be compensated one way,
mhm.
or I might have like, I might have historically been used to splitting revenue or attribution between different parts of a sales team. But in this model, it might be somebody who is a success person, a service person, an administrative person saying, what, there's underutilization of X. We should talk to them about this benefit.
Yeah.
So different parts of the team can drive attribution towards a better customer experience and thus more revenue and more loyalty. Like how do you get people from fighting in a way over what slice of the pie they own and show how well they did
Yeah.
versus attributing it to the benefit of the whole organization?
That's a great question. I think this is where RevOps again plays a really important role of, this is why it's not marketing strategy and ops, sales strategy and ops, CS strategy and ops. I mean, that's how we evolved from there. And I can get into that a little bit later on what our evolution has been with how we formed RevOps. But the objective here is to go look at it and say, how do I make sure from an incentive standpoint, I'm driving the message from what the incentive plan is driving an indication of what are the behaviors you want to be driving. And I think being able to look at, rep incentives across the board and saying, are these aligned in terms of the customer outcomes we're trying to drive and the roles we believe that are best suited to go drive them? And it really, what it does is it forces you to really think about, okay, what is the role of a support rep in the context of helping with this particular outcome usage, and thinking about what is that behavior I want to drive, and then how do I not just incent that behavior, how do I actually measure that and make it very clear what our measurement of success is? And then you can have, different measures for different roles on how are they contributing to that outcome. And again, I don't think you're going to get in a situation where every role is equally suited to focus on a particular aspect of that buyer's journey, but it really forces you to step back and say, do we have clarity on the outcomes we're trying to drive? Do we then have further clarity on which roles within the organization are best suited to work together and deliver that outcome? And then the other side of it is, we haven't used the word AI yet, AI and automation. It's also thinking about where are there roles and opportunities for, well, you know what? We could create a excellent digital customer experience and not have somebody involved. And the bar needs to be it's, you know, more efficient. It's going to help, these humans spend more time on higher value added activities, helping advance customer outcomes in a more intentional way, I would say.
Yeah, that takes it from the strategy and the customer engagement to a lot more of the operational execution component. Like
Yeah.
it slides into the theme where you talk about in terms of elevate, innovate, and reinvent, right? I think of that in what you just described as, the people, the processes, and the systems. You have to
Yeah.
have the right people in the right places, and you have to figure out the processes, but it's this systems, this operational component that I think is another layer. So it seems like you have to tie in with the internal operational systems and the data structures and whether it's to enable a human through tech or enable the AI to release the human. It seems like there's a lot of work there. How do you wrap your arms around that? Because it seems like another big part of the organization that you have to fix for this to all work smoothly.
It's a great point. I think the way I think about RevOps as well is connective tissue,
Mm.
within the organization and the ability to really think what are all of the components that generate revenue? What are the building blocks? What are the different teams that contribute to it? And how do you bring them all together? And the way, mechanisms and process are essential for that to give, different teams clarity into, okay, what are the priorities? How do we jointly develop a roadmap? But in your specific example, like teams, we work very closely with our data team, work very closely with our internal systems team that partners with us around the go-to-market technology stack that says, okay, here's how we're going to go improve rep productivity, or here's how we're going to really continue to up level customer experience. We have to have clarity around what those objectives are at which stage, and then say, okay, what are the different teams that we need to go orchestrate and bring together to go make sure that that experience is as delightful as it is. The other side of it is we are HubSpot. We are a customer connected customer platform. We run on HubSpot,
Hmm.
and that gives us an integrated visibility into our customers and gives us the ability to understand what that customer journey looks like. So between solving for the customer, which is a saying we always have, SFTC, which is solve for the customer, that guides and directs a ton of the energy in terms of where to go focus. The other side is how do we continue up leveling our reps? Enablement is another team that we spend a lot of time with to really understand where across that buyer's journey can the rep be most helpful and most impactful in terms of helping them move through the journey.
Sounds like a heck of a journey. And one of the things that came to mind while you were talking was just the question of why now? Why do you think that now RevOps is evolving? So important. There's revenue reinvention for a reason, right? But I'll admit it. 5 to 10 years ago, I was ignorant to terms like RevOps and DevOps. I don't think that they were as prevalent or as important to an organization as they are now. What do
Yeah.
you think that's changed that's driving this change of how companies operate?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of it is, market conditions have changed quite a bit, right? Between COVID and post COVID, I think the expectations for what good looks like have changed,
Mm.
and it's not growth at all costs. It's really that emphasis of how are you going to go do things efficiently, grow in a durable, sustainable manner. I think interest rates had a lot to do with that, which then had that big impact on valuation. So I think just the backdrop, the macro environment has just changed, and that's changed what investor expectations um, and so forth have pivoted over that time. And I think it's really a sense of, you're building for the long term.
Mhm.
And if you're building for the long term, you need to really take a step back and saying, are you doing it in a scalable, efficient, durable way that is just intentional, and it's not about just, raising rounds of money as a private company at any valuation and then putting it all into top line, but then not spending enough time putting it into top of funnel, and then not thinking about the obsessing over whether the customer is getting value for it.
That's a really good point, right? Because if you go back to that old adage of it costs a certain amount of money to acquire a customer, but you can get a lot more benefit, revenue, long lifetime value of an existing customer over acquiring a new one. Which actually leads me to another question of, have you noticed any differences between the stage of or size of the company that you're dealing with in the demands that they have, or their response to the revenue operations model?
I would say it is not sales ops 2.0, and that's really important to understand. And what I mean by that is I think sales ops 2.0 or sales ops 1.0 was a support for a sales leader. And
Hmm.
some sales ops leaders were more proactive, more, driving being a co-pilot with that sales leader and played a more strategic role. But I wouldn't say that was necessarily how the role was defined, or what was defined as good for that role. I think as you shift into RevOps, it's how do you help the organization see around corners and take that integrated view across the revenue engine. Because we sort of talked about it earlier, there are going to be puts and takes between functions, and if you plan for each of these in a silo, you then get siloed execution. So when you think about the building blocks of that operating system we were talking about, there's the people side of it, there's the process and mechanisms, there's data, there's systems, and I think you really have to look at where do you get started, what would you be remiss if you did not start early. Like if you think about your data strategy early on in the formation of your company, you're probably going to benefit from the fact that you don't have to go try to re-engineer it completely later. So think about, where are there areas of technical debt you can incur later as you start to scale? What are the foundational elements you need to start putting in now? How are you thinking about data definitions? Are they consistent? Is there a single, source of truth for that across the company? So I think there's things you could look at from a much more mature, later stage company and say, what elements of that equation do I need to start thinking about now? And it doesn't mean I'm going to invest at the same level as a company that's, public and, at a different stage, but it starts to give you a real sense of, across these different building blocks, where do you need to get started? And I think some of these are going to obviously require investment, certainly on the data and system side. But I think a great place to start is process. As you start
Hmm.
to think about those other elements and what your investment time frame looks like, because process is the least costly of these, and it's around, alignment and collaboration and communication. So if you have one RevOps person or two RevOps people, and that's how you define RevOps, what role can that individual or set of individuals play in driving a common language between the different functional teams? I think that's the start of it, as you start to think about, okay, this is what my data investment strategy is going to look like. This is what my systems roadmap looks like.
Sure. I mean, you said something about if you plan for a siloed system, you get a siloed outcome, and that was kind of sticking in my brain. And regardless of how small you are, you could be a 5-person shop, 10-person, 40, 50, 100. But I mean, let's say you're a 10-person shop and everything goes through the CEO, or everything goes through one person and people operate in their little groups, especially if you're a remote or distributed team. It's very easy to limit your performance by being siloed and thinking that you're actually operating as a team. What I'm hearing you say is, thinking about this mindset early on, you're saying, when do we get to the point where we're not a few people in a room talking about everything, where we need someone to pull that glue together? And then how do we put it on a foundation that's the strength of the company, right? The core thing that we do best and do differently. Like, all right, let's build on that, but make sure we grow. As we grow, we are growing and leveraging all the strengths to move in the right direction. So as we talk about the maturation of revenue operations, I'm thinking now about like what other advice can we have for the listeners? What sort of tips do you have, CFO,
Yeah.
CEO, RevOps leaders around strategy or where to start or where you've found that you've run into problems that were expected or unexpected that they can give them a means from like benefiting from some of your lessons learned.
The first thing I would say is keep it simple and start small.
Hmm.
It's, RevOps is, you could define it as narrowly as you want, or you could define it as broadly as you want. And I think it's understanding where are you from a stage standpoint, and asking even just basic questions. How do I have alignment between my marketing and sales teams? Do I have alignment on the core processes that require collaboration between different parts of the organization to deliver that customer outcome we talked about? Do we have the right communication, collaboration, and joint view of what it takes? And you really, I think, should also think about the change management is a really big piece of this. It's co-opting and bringing in the teams that are ultimately going to be responsible for driving these outcomes, bringing them in as part of the process early and often, and then hone in on a couple of areas of that process that are particularly broken or could use some work. You solve those, show the improvement. You then win credibility. You earn that, you earn that trust to go say, okay, now let's go look at the next two. And you're never going to be done, right? It's one of these that's like, you're always going to be iterating and finding ways to continually improve. But I think you can keep that continuous improvement mindset and constantly looking for like, where is it that you should be dedicating time, and it's worth the calories to up level execution. So it's trying not to do too much at once. It's trying to stay focused. What are the 2 to 3 big areas that you want to go hone in on? What are the teams involved? How do you get common, as I said, language and a shared understanding of the problem? And then how are you going to keep that team together and accountable against specific milestones? So it sounds simple, but but there's a lot more complexity that you can add to it. But you need to get the ball rolling, I think, and that's how you start to build that trust. The trust is so important here, because I talked about sales ops 1.0 and 2.0, like, or RevOps, and the business partnership is such a critical element of this. It's, are you, a co-pilot with this go-to-market leader, or are you you know, really just providing reporting and, things that could over time get automated, right?
As we round out the part where we talk about the maturation of revenue operations, I want to start a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the mature end. Because if you're listening to this and you're new, you're like, wow, this is a lot. Where do I start? Or you talk about how to get started. I'm curious about when does someone know that they need to? So can you
Yeah.
suggest maybe what some of the signals are that an organization probably needs to think about making this transition?
I would say get started when you are really building out go-to-market. So, after product market fit, and you're starting to build out your go-to-market team, you might start with just a head of sales, for example, and then it's a sales ops role to start with. But as you start to say, okay, I need to go specialize marketing, or I need to now think about have customers, I need to have a team to service and engage with them on the post sales side. You start to get functional specialization. I think that's the signal to me that when you're starting to achieve that go to market fit, and the early stages of that, you don't need to over rotate and build out a huge team, but starting to think about these different elements that we talked about, like, well, what do I have a common definition of what a customer is between marketing and sales? Does support think of the customer in the same way that marketing thinks about them. So it's asking questions. The answer may not be yes, but you may be okay with that. But it's asking the right questions at that point and saying, okay, if I truly want this prospect that becomes a customer to have a single experience from this company, what's getting in the way of having a great experience, right? And those are some of the signals. It's like you start to differentiate functionally, and it's no longer, as you said before, a few folks in a room that can just say, oh, here's what I did with this customer yesterday, can you now take the onboarding on? It's no longer the word of mouth. It's that you're starting to see early signs of go to market fit, and you're starting to think about how you go after the market. So
Yeah. I bet you could find some passionate teams who are having heated debates about who the customer is and what they want and what's the best way to serve them. And that might be one of those, passing moments as an executive in the hallway being like, okay, these are spilling out of just one-on-ones,
just
but good
yeah,
indicators, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
people are really trying and struggling against the constraints of the existing system.
exactly right, exactly right.
All right, let's go to the tougher part, I think, which is how do you future proof this, right? How do
Yeah.
you build a system that it finds that Goldilocks amount of innovation? You said don't do too much, right? And do a little bit at a time, but you might be behind the competition or behind customer expectations, or better yet, setting industry expectations of what some product or service in your sector should be able to do. So if you think about, future proofing, building better strategies, how do you think about that? How do you try to capture that in some systematic way?
The data will be an indication of pattern. Really looking at patterns and trends in data, I think, is a starting point around where to go look and saying, are there things that are actually changing from a systematic standpoint, and understanding that through a data driven lens. I think the other side of it, which we really obsess about, is listening mechanisms from our customers, listening mechanisms from our partners, and then, as I said, staying very close to your front line and understanding like what are they hearing. The qualitative side of it is all of the inputs that give you a sense of what signals do you see here in the data, and is that corroborated by what's happening in the broader environment with your customers and what your reps are hearing. And I think that's how you understand whether something is afoot that you need to think about how to adapt to it or stay the course. And the closer to that truth you could be, the faster you're going to recognize those signals. And some of them you just have to let play out for a little bit. Great example, generative AI, right? And, you know, 2 years ago, that was like a part of what we did with RevOps. But like since the middle of last year, it's become a huge, focus for us around how do we think about rep and customer experience in the context of how does generative AI and automation come together to rethink that. So there's an example of new technology, new capabilities that now have become much more widely available, that causes you to rethink how are you going about solving some of those existing problems. Now you're still anchoring it on that customer journey, and you're saying where in that customer journey am I trying to solve a problem with the technology or the capabilities. So it's not doing it for technology's sake or having fun with AI, although AI is a lot of fun. It's doing it for a purpose, right? And understanding what are you trying to change. And as I said, it's either customer experience, partner experience, rep experience, and productivity that typically will drive that.
It might be that doing the technology, doing the AI, learning how to use it
Yeah.
as part of the whole experience is because for the employee, it helps you capture that data. It helps you secure the insights. Because, like, if you're breaking from a siloed organization and, the sales team would talk inside amongst each other about problems, but somebody would syndicate that information and share it back to RevOps.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to feel like you're reaching in to kind of pull it out. You want this system to organically flow and draw it to you. Now, I get the feeling that you guys might be at an advantage at doing that because if you're operating on HubSpot, you can build into the system the ability for your team to have that. But I guess it leads to two questions. One, how do you optimize kind of extracting the insights from your own team? And two, have you found that lead to other product solutions that have improved the business overall because of the way you're working better together?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, the underpinning of AI and automation is you have good data or great data, right? And I think that's a combination of the data we have about, what we know about a prospect or so forth, and how can we think about a guided go-to-market motion. That's
Mm,
how we think about it. It's what are the different steps of that journey, and how do we think about guiding the rep in terms of what is that next best action, whether it's across the sales journey, whether it's
mm,
across the delight journey, the engage journey, or the delight journey, and how are you leveraging the data and the insights to help go and power those different capabilities? And then how are you leveraging data with automation to help a rep, pre-sales, post-sales, to say, here is the right engagement with the right customer or prospect at the right time, and then curate that with, okay, and here's how to make that a great engagement. Here's the playbook. That's the threading. I think RevOps can really play a big role in, because you're seeing how all you don't want to think about these again in pockets. It's like, what is the outcome you're trying to drive? I want to create a great rep experience so they can deliver a great experience to our customers. And then what does it take to go do that? So it's again working backwards from that outcome.
that's super. I'm glad this is being recorded because I'm going to go through that section a couple times and like break it down a little bit. I think there's some real gold in there. I know we could do this for quite some time, but we are we have to kind of wrap up. So as we get into our like what's next takeaways, I guess there's two questions. One is any other last advice for businesses who are looking to transform their revenue operations that you would reflect on and share in conclusion?
I would encourage, folks that are at a stage of maturity, go talk to other companies, maybe at a similar stage, maybe some that are a little ahead of you, and talk about what they're doing, or how are they, maybe there's an industry angle to it that you can really understand. How are you leveraging RevOps across your organization? How are you defining it? And then how are you operationalizing it?
All right, last one. And we've touched on a lot of this before, so it's kind of one of those in conclusion comments. What do you think is the single most important thing that RevOps will do to continue changing business in the future?
It's really helping to proactively drive the business. It's helping the business understand where it needs to go. This is where I get into leading versus lagging indicators. I think there's a tendency to measure things in the rearview mirror, and it's last month's data is last month's data. It's really thinking about in the here and now, what are you doing to drive the future outcome? So I think about it as there's hindsight, there's insight, there's foresight. How do you get to foresight? I think
Yeah.
we've made, I think historically it's been a very hindsight driven sales ops 1.0 kind of world, getting much more to a focus on data analytics and insights on why things happen the way they happened, right?
Yeah.
The foresight is, how do you help predict the future and then create?
Hmm.
And I think that's a role that, RevOps, sitting on top of all of these different areas, is just uniquely qualified to help be a great business partner to the go-to-market teams and help guide that journey.
That's outstanding. Yeah, you said it before, looking around the corner, right?
Looking around the
Looking
corner,
out
yeah.
around the corner, anticipating what's going to be there. And I
What's going to
think,
happen and how do you get out ahead of it? Exactly.
yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Sid. It was really great to have a conversation with you, and I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy it. And really appreciate having you.
Likewise. Great conversation.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you again next time.
Revenue Reinvention is brought to you by Accenture in partnership with Conga. Discover how Accenture and Conga are reshaping the landscape of revenue reinvention. Their unique collaboration merges Accenture's deep transformation expertise with Conga's market-leading technology solutions to redefine effective revenue lifecycle management. Together, they're not just facilitating growth, they're engineering it. Join them in this journey towards sustainable and scalable growth.